So, for a couple of really tense days, all eyes were on Islamabad, Pakistan. The whole point was to try and defuse this regional powder keg, right? Through these incredibly high stakes talks between the US and Iran. But then, poof. After all that negotiation, it just completely fell apart. So, let's get into exactly why that happened. Okay, get this. 21 hours. I mean, think about that. For almost an entire day, you've got these top officials just locked away in the Serena Hotel trying to build some kind of bridge over this massive chasm of mistrust. But, in the end, the clock just ran out. That bridge, it didn't just crack, it totally collapsed. And honestly, it left way more questions than answers.
And the end, when it came, was just bam, super swift. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance walks up to the cameras and just lays it out there with this brutal simplicity. The message was clear: an agreement could not be reached. Basically, no deal. Those words pretty much confirmed it wasn't just a stall. No, this was a complete and total failure.
So you have to ask, right? How does a negotiation with so much on the line just completely fall apart like that? It's kind of spectacular in a bad way. To really get what happened, to understand this deadlock, we've got to go behind those closed doors. We're going to pinpoint exactly where everything went wrong.
All right, cautious optimism in Islamabad. Before the whole thing collapsed, there was actually a lot of optimism. Seriously. So let's rewind a bit, back to the beginning, right when the delegations were first showing up in Pakistan. The atmosphere was just charged. You could feel this sense of possibility, like, hey, maybe a historic deal is actually going to happen here.
And just look at who was in the room. This wasn't some B team. The U.S. sent Vice President J.D. Vance himself. In Iran, they sent their speaker, Bagher Ghalibaf, and the foreign minister, plus a whole team of over 70 experts. I mean, these are not junior diplomats. Both sides sent in the heavyweights. That was a huge signal that they were actually serious about this thing. And at first, all the signs were pointing up. Everything looked really positive. You had the whole red carpet welcome, you had handshakes between people who are, historic adversaries. And then the technical talk started up, which is usually a really good sign that a real deal is getting hammered out. With Pakistan's top brass personally mediating, it honestly looked like we were seeing real progress. Okay, the ghost of a broken promise. Because hanging over all this optimism, there was this ghost, this really deep historical distrust. And it's all rooted in a promise, one that was made, it was written down, and then it was just torn up by one side. And that history, that ghost, was pretty much going to define this entire negotiation. So where does this ghost come from? Well, it all goes back to 2015. Remember the big JCPOA nuclear deal? It was a landmark agreement, truly historic. But then just 3 years later, in 2018, the United States just walked away, unilaterally. For Iran, this wasn't just some policy change. No, this was proof that an American signature on a treaty could literally be erased overnight. And that one act, it basically poisoned the will for every single negotiation that came after. And this quote from Professor Morandi, who was actually with the Iranian delegation, just hits the nail on the head. He said, "We are not ready to trust them. We won't believe them until they take action." Just listen to that. The trust was completely gone. So words, promises, forget it. They were off the table. Iran was demanding concrete, real-world actions, period. Otherwise, no deal. All right, so now we're at the impasse, actions versus words. And this really gets us to the absolute core of the conflict. This was the fundamental disagreement that, honestly, no amount of talking was going to solve. It was a total clash between two completely different currencies of diplomacy. On one side, you have tangible actions, and on the other, just written words. And this is exactly where the talks slammed into a brick wall. Look at Iran's demands. They were super concrete. A ceasefire in Lebanon, forcing Israel to stop attacks. They wanted the unfreezing of their financial assets. We're talking actual money. But the U.S., they were offering something totally different. Written assurances, a simple offer for future cooperation. Basically, promises. So you see the problem, right? One side is demanding hard proof, and the other is just offering paper. And from Iran's point of view, this was completely non-negotiable. I mean, think about it. After the U.S. ripped up the JCPOA, why on earth would they sign another piece of paper? Another promise that a new president could just throw in the trash a few years later? No way. They needed actions that couldn't be undone. Irreversible actions, not reversible words. So this
Impasse, this brick wall. It really set the stage for a pretty dramatic final act. Let's get into the countdown to collapse, the final 14 hours. We're going to walk through the last few hours of these talks. And they were tense, they were confusing. It was a countdown that ended not with a deal, but with people just packing their bags and leaving. 14 hours. That is how long the final marathon session dragged on. An all-night, desperate push to find some kind of compromise that we now know just wasn't in the cards. The clock was absolutely ticking down to failure. The timeline for that last night is just wild. It shows you how chaotic it all got. Okay, so at 9 p.m., reports start leaking out. Iran isn't budging on key security issues. Then, late into the night, planes, 2 Iranian, 1 Turkish, land at the airbase. The rumor is they're there to take the Iranian delegation home. A pretty clear sign it's over, right? But then, get this, at 1 a.m., Iran's government posts on social media that the talks are extending. What? Complete confusion. Was this some last-ditch effort? Nope. Just moments later, J.D. Vance is at that press conference announcing it's all failed and they're leaving.
So now we have to talk about the fallout and a new regional reality. Because with the collapse of these talks, the whole diplomatic landscape has just been fundamentally changed. What happened in Islamabad isn't just the end of something. It's the beginning of a new, way more uncertain, and frankly, a much more dangerous reality for the region.
And the fallout is hitting fast and wide. For Pakistan, its whole role as a mediator is now being challenged. That diplomatic channel might be closing. For Saudi Arabia, they might be forced to actually activate their security pact with Pakistan if things escalate. And the UAE, they've already been pulling money out of Pakistan, and this failure could make those tensions even worse. And for the entire Middle East, the big takeaway is this. The collapse raises the risk of a direct conflict. It's a major shift in the balance of power. So in the end, what we saw was just a fundamental clash, wasn't it? It was a demand for real, concrete action versus an offer of written words. And the whole thing was haunted by that ghost of a broken promise. With diplomacy failing this spectacularly, this publicly, it leaves us all with one massive, critical question. With the doors of diplomacy seemingly slammed shut, how will the balance of power in the Middle East now be decided?